Clemson University remembers the 9 men and women killed in Charleston in a house of worship during a vigil at the Brooks Center for the Performing Arts. I'm Wanda Johnson, and this is a special edition of Clemson News Now. On holy ground, Massacre in Charleston, we are examining the aftermath of what is described as a crime of hate in the state's holy city, Charleston, South Carolina. Wednesday, June 17th, 8 p.m., a man entered historic Emanuel A.M.E. Church as members gathered for Bible study. Now identified as 21-year-old Dylan Storm Roof, police say Roof sat in on the service for nearly an hour before he shot and killed 9 worshipers, including State Senator and Senior Pastor Clemson Ph.D. A 10th person survived the shooting. The morning after the shooting, a Gastonia, North Carolina woman spotted the suspect in the black Hyundai broadcast by media and tailed him until police arrested Roof in Shelby, North Carolina, more than 200 miles from Charleston. Roof's first court appearance is scheduled October 23rd. Investigators say Roof not only confessed to the shootings, but said he wanted to start a race war. Roof reportedly researched and targeted Emanuel because it is an historic African-American church. All the victims were black. There are more layers to the story than we can address right now, so we're going to narrow our focus and talk about race relations in South Carolina, its history, present, and future. The purpose of Clemson News Now is to educate, enlighten, and engage, so we want to hear back from you. Share your comments here on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Clemson News Now. Our 2 guests are Dr. Vernon Burton, a Clemson professor of history and sociology and director of the university's Cyber Institute. Burton is a prolific scholar and author-editor of more than 20 books and articles, including his Pulitzer-nominated books, The Age of Lincoln and In My Father's House. Dr. Burton's research and teaching interests include the American South, race relations and community, and the intersection of humanities and social sciences. Our other guest is A.D. Carson, a Clemson Ph.D. student in Rhetorics, Communication, and Information Design. Carson is the author of the novel Cold and the City. He also is an activist for social change, a recording artist, producer, and founder of the See the Stripes campaign at Clemson University. We began our coverage with A.D. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you traveled to Charleston recently following the shooting, and you went there for what purpose? What compelled you to go there?
Well, the College of Charleston actually invited me down to perform at a social justice concert with their Office of Sustainability, and that was kind of tragically the weekend that Walter Scott was killed. So before that video footage came out, someone with the Black Lives Matter movement there in Charleston came to the concert and said, there's this video footage and we really need support from the community. We also need support from other places. And I told him I'm from Clemson, so I would do whatever I could to try to help spread the word. And unfortunately, I had to come back here to Clemson that weekend. And then the next day, the video footage came out. So when this tragedy occurred, I thought, well, maybe I can kind of go down there and offer whatever assistance I could, even if it's just listening or, you know, whatever I could do. I just thought I'm not going to sit at home and be told what's going on. I can kind of go out and see what's happening.
In order to better explain why you went there too, we can talk a little bit about your research here at Clemson University. Yes. And your area of study. And why it's so important that you would go there.
Well, my research actually is kind of dealing with history and its presence in our current time, but it also deals with the ways that those kinds of messages are mediated. So because I've been dealing with Clemson's particular history and how we deal with it here on campus and how we can be better about it in the future, I thought that it would be extremely important to go to Charleston and see how there are sort of echoes of what we're going through here at Clemson there in Charleston.
So you get out of the car, you step into the throes of everything in Charleston. What sense did you get as soon as you arrived in the city?
As soon as I arrived in the city, actually, Professor Kumanike and I, we walked down the street to Mother Emanuel, and there were 3 men standing there. And so we actually initiated a conversation with them. And we just had conversations about history, actually, and about the nuances of living there in Charleston. And they had quite a bit of very insightful information for us about what we kind of stepped into in the moment that we were dealing with. So I thought that was, it was great. We stood out there and we talked for 5 hours. In the moment, actually, a police officer came over to us and told us that if we had marijuana in our pockets, that we needed to get rid of it or something. He said he smelled marijuana. None of us were smoking or anything. And then he later came and apologized to us because there was someone else in the distance who actually, he said that he busted the night before, which seemed a little bit odd. But that did happen as well. And then there's that moment where the 3 men from Charleston said, "You see what we're dealing with? You see what goes on?" And it was extremely enlightening to see just, and I would call it sort of microaggressive. It wasn't anything that anybody would go home and just be enraged about, but you just kind of think at this moment, at this very somber sort of moment where we're connecting with people, that there's this idea that, I don't know, that our actions are being policed when we're just communing.
So after you had these conversations, do you think that was sort of medicine, or that is helping people with the healing process? Is that part of your motivation in what you do as an activist and as a researcher?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that being involved in conversations about those difficult topics, or about, a really heavy subject like a hate crime committed in one's own community, I think that it's extremely helpful to deal with the moment, the crime, the direct aftermath of the crime. But I think it's also important to talk about the things that lead up to the crime. Those, I think that James Baldwin called it invisible tears. And so these are the conversations that I'm hoping to engage people in. And hopefully we can be better on the other side of them. I know that it can be extremely difficult and triggering for many people to have those conversations brought up. And many people would rather not have them, just not talk at all and say that everything will be okay so long as we don't ever bring it up. But what we found is that when we don't bring it up, then it makes it so much harder to make sense of these kinds of tragedies when they happen, because we have no frame of reference. We don't have any way of being able to deal with what might have happened before in order for us to get to this point. And then we make ourselves feel better by saying that someone like this killer is a lone wolf, as though the rhetoric that he's engaged in is not being repeated by other folks. And honestly, we know that that's not the truth.
You wrote an article when you returned from Charleston that was inside the conversation. And also, as we are talking right now, we should note that the pictures that you've been watching on the screen were captured by AD. But in the conversation after your experience in Charleston, you called the article Mother Emanuel, The Past Still Lives With Us. And near the end of the story, you wrote, "Let's just not pretend our present doesn't look eerily similar to our past. If we refuse to accept our present with hopes that we can do better and be better, can't we do the same with our history?" Explain that.
Well, I just think that the people who say that we should leave history alone, so when we talk about things like removing the flag, or we talk about things like statues and monuments that honor white supremacists, people always say that we'll leave it alone. It's in the past. But events like this help us to understand that the ideology still exists, and that there are people who still are very much influenced by those ideologies. So I think that we can be more responsible in dealing with our histories in the same ways that we want to be responsible about the present. And so if this present moment tells us anything about what we can do about those kinds of things that we use to honor people, then it should be able to be instructive to us about our past. And so when we start looking at the ways that we memorialize people, we also are cognizant of the people who are affected by that, not just the people who were a part of that history, but the people who are presently existent in front of those memorials or have to pass them every day. Hopefully we learn from our past. I mean, you know, we say that if we know better, then we can do better, and if we do better, then we'll be better. It seems like a very simple formula, but sadly, we haven't really employed it.
Very good. We want to thank you so much for joining us this hour for this special edition of Clemson News Now. Now, you can read the entire article that A.D. wrote at conversation.com and see more of his work at adthegreat.com. Still to come, Dr. Vernon Burton talks to us about the history of the South and the Confederate flag. Again, there's a call to remove it from the State House. And Brandon Boatwright is monitoring the conversations online. We'll have more from him from the Social Media Listening Center. These stories and much more in part 2 of our special Clemson News Now coverage of On Holy Ground, Massacre in Charleston. We leave you now remembering the lives and legacies of those killed in Charleston.
Cynthia Graham Hurd, 54, a bright star with an engaging smile, was a devoted member of Mother Emanuel A.M.E. Church. Cynthia enjoyed a lifelong love of books. She worked for the Charleston County Libraries for 31 years and was manager of the John Dart and the St. Andrews Regional Library branches. She is remembered for her work to ensure expanded services for the citizens of Charleston County.
Susie Jackson, 87, was a member of Mother Emanuel A.M.E. Church and sang in the choir. She is remembered for being a mother of many and was devoted to her family. At one time, almost every house on Jackson's block was owned by a relative. Her home was a center of family gatherings, and she will be remembered for cooking a mean pot.
Ethel Lance. Ethel Lance was a devoted member of Mother Emanuel A.M.E. Church and is remembered for having a heart full of song. Everyone who knew her described her as a joy to be around. The 70-year-old grandmother had worked at Emanuel A.M.E. for more than 3 decades.
The Reverend DePayne Middleton Doctor was an assistant pastor at the Mother Emanuel A.M.E. Church. The 49-year-old retiree was a former director of the Community Development Block Grant Program in Charleston County. She was employed at the Southern Wesleyan University's Charleston Learning Center as an admissions coordinator at the time of her death.
Clemente Pinckney, 41, served as senior pastor of Mother Emanuel A.M.E. Church and as a state senator. He was the youngest African American to be elected to our state legislature. Senator Pinckney spent time at Clemson when he was in high school as a participant in our career workshop. He was also a member of the Clemson 4-H program in Jasper County when he was a young man, which he often said sparked his interest in public service. Senator Pinckney was a dedicated public servant, a champion for higher education, and a dear friend of Clemson University.
Tywanza Sanders. Tywanza Sanders, 26, was a member of Mother Emanuel A.M.E. Church. He was a recent graduate of Allen University in Columbia, South Carolina. He had reportedly jumped in front of a relative when the shooting began in order to shield his loved one from any harm. He is the brother of Shireen Simmons Goss, Clemson, 1997.
Daniel Simmons. Daniel Simmons, 74, was known as a caring servant and excellent administrator. Simmons was a Vietnam veteran and earned a Purple Heart for his service. Simmons retired after 30 years as a senior pastor at a neighboring church, and he had served on the ministerial staff of Mother Emanuel A.M.E. Church.
Sharonda Coleman Singleton, 45, served as a speech therapist and girls track team coach at Goose Creek High School. She was also an assistant pastor at Mother Emanuel A.M.E. Church. Singleton ran track for South Carolina State University and was a member of the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference Outdoor Track and Field Championship team in 1987 and 88.
Myra Thompson. Myra Thompson was a devoted member of Mother Emanuel A.M.E. Church. She served on the church property committee and taught Bible study. She was a former teacher in the Charleston County School District. She graduated from Benedict College in 1979.